right, here we go with another episode. Today we have Ivan Lee. Ivan, for those of our listeners that just that haven't met you yet, you want to just tell everybody just what you do and why is that important?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. So my name is Ivan. I'm the CEO and founder here at a company called Datasaur. And what we do is we help build private instances of ChatGPT, essentially, for enterprise companies. So you can imagine that employees at companies like Samsung or Wells Fargo would want to use ChatGPT, but the organizations may not want to send all that data to a third party, like internal proprietary data. We'll help them build their own versions of these large language models that they can then use for custom purposes internally. And yeah, really just ushering this new wave of Gen AI technology.
Cool. So are you you're using the like ChatGPT platform then, right? And customizing a specific like engine for their use case? Or how does
That is one option. We can absolutely just piggyback off of OpenAI and customize ChatGPT for your company. But there's also a lot of other competitors and providers that offer competing solutions and have their own strengths and weaknesses. So for example, Meta has launched a model called LLaMA, and that is a very similar technology, but it's open source, which means that you can actually launch this on your own servers. And now it's not being sent to Meta, it's not being sent to OpenAI. Nobody else is getting that data except for your own organization.
And Ivan, looking back at just your journey through life, it almost feels like you are exactly where you're supposed to be with the right time, the right skill set, and the right sort of perfect storm of a lot of things that have culminated for you to sort of step into this role and push this forward. But I'm curious because it can't be boiled down to luck. There's so much strategy that this is a decade worth of building up to. So I think I'd love to hear what you would say has been your superpower over the last decade getting to this point personally. And then we'll talk about sort of why now, right? Why is all this stuff coming to the surface now? But first off, I'd love to hear what you think has been the superpower that has pulled you all the way to this point.
Thank you for the kind words. I will say a whole lot of it has been luck. So, but I think there's ways to navigate and make the best of your own experiences along the way. So let me give a little bit of context here. I studied computer science at Stanford just because I've been a lifelong gamer and I always wanted to build and design video games, and computer science is the way to do that. My first startup was actually a mobile gaming company. So my friends and I set out on this dream to design our own video game, and we did precisely that. We built this game, launched it on the App Store, got to 1 million users, and ended up selling the company to Yahoo in 2013. And that's where kind of the first stroke of luck occurred. We arrived at Yahoo, and the original plan was to take over the Yahoo Games portal and modernize that. But I got reassigned at the last second to a machine learning project. And that changed my entire career. I started working on machine learning, kind of fell in love with the technology, thought that it was going to be really, really powerful. This is way back in 2013, right? So 10 years later, we now have, or I guess even more than that, 11 years later, we're now in this machine learning revolution, and ChatGPT has kind of changed the world and how we think about AI. So yeah, I was excited about the technology. I wanted to work in this space, but also when I was starting this company, I was looking at what is the best thing for me to do, right? Like what fits my skill set and what could be an exciting place to dabble in for the next few years. And lo and behold, here we are.
That is really beautiful how the humility really shows, right? And because we're always on the journey, and there's so many things that are going to be coming, and if we can't have that level of humility and say, okay, some of this is going to be out of my control, but I'm going to do the best that I can and kind of hope for the best. It kind of leads into the next thing I want to ask you about, because especially in the AI space right now and machine learning, how fast things are going, the general sentiment of a lot of my friends that are in that world is the feeling of being one step behind all the time. How do you deal with that, and how do you deal with the fierce competition? Because it literally is a race. It's almost like, who can get there faster? How can we do this like to keep up? Even it's a constant grind. And I'd just like to hear your approach. Like, what do you personally find has been super helpful for that?
So I think I do some mentoring on this side, and I work with, high schoolers trying to figure out where they want to go in life. I think the single most important attribute right now in modern society is curiosity, because there is just so much out there to learn. Like everything's on Wikipedia and YouTube, and all the knowledge is out there for you to learn. It's just, what direction do you want to choose, right? Now, specifically in this world of Gen AI, as a technologist, I'm almost giddy with how quickly things are moving. It's the fastest we've ever seen technology move in my entire career and my entire lifetime. And maybe it's only going to accelerate from here on out, right? But just to give you a sense, these are some names that you may have heard. OpenAI in May launched GPT-4o, right? And then in June, Anthropic launched Claude 3.5. And then we had LLaMA 3.1, and then GPT-o1 now, and Google Gemini 1.5 Flash. And just as of yesterday, LLaMA 3.2. Like, yes, it is moving at a breakneck speed. It is actually insane how quickly things are moving. But that makes it that much more fun, because nobody is an expert in this space yet. You can spend 3 or 6 months and become a top 10%, top 1% kind of expert in this new field. So for me, I think it really is just fun being in this space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with all the different platforms, this is something I was specifically thinking about before meeting with you. We've got, like you said, you've got OpenAI, you've got LLaMA, you've got Claude, and each has their own strengths and weaknesses. Specifically, we've found Claude, especially the most recent iteration, to be most useful for what we do. It seems to be better at copywriting and has more like natural conversational abilities, versus ChatGPT seems more like, here's the data, and a little bit less, or a little bit more kind of rigid and in its approach. What kind of creates those differences? And, do you envision a future where there's, multiple engines that exist and each one is used for a more specific purpose?
Yeah, 100%. So to get into the technical details for what creates those differences, a lot of it has to do with the methods being used and the data being used to train it, right? So you may have heard, for instance, like Reddit signed a really big deal to sign over all of their data to I believe it was Google as their provider, right? And of course, Google has access to YouTube. So you'll find that their model, which is called Gemini, will have certain strengths that may be more correlated to that treasure trove of data that they've accumulated, right? Whereas Claude, I agree, it's well known for having a bit better logical reasoning. And so maybe they use certain methodologies to train on kind of logic and reasoning, right? But of course, now we have this competitor from OpenAI, and O1 is what they call their new model, which can actually solve crossword puzzles, which is incredible. Yeah. So do you guys watch Game of Thrones? Have you watched it?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
For me, this is like real life Silicon Valley Game of Thrones in real time, right? And this is why it's so fun for me to follow. Like, oh, Google is now doing this, and they're allying themselves with this set of partners, right? And Amazon's going to do this, and Microsoft is allying itself with OpenAI. But then there's all this drama and intrigue, and so that's I really feel like we're living in this real time. Like, we get to see all the strategies play out. We get to see real world repercussions. There's also funny anecdotes and stories out there. I don't know if you saw the story, like last year there's a recipe generator, but it turns out if you use Gen AI and this recipe generator, it actually in one instance was able to produce something that would actually be poisonous to humans. So not funny in this, like nobody was injured, but it was funny that like we're still figuring out the consequences and ramifications of all this.
Yeah, and it really, this concept of empire building within the space really does sort of lead into a big theme of the show. You know, our show is about tapping into your big possible, right? What is it that you can achieve in your lifespan that is bigger than just settling for whatever scraps on the table that you're going to find? How do you navigate that as both an individual and a company to start playing the game on a bigger scale? Whether that means, how do you get into the doors of these big corporations and start negotiating at their tables? And how do you start to ally yourselves with a lot of the clients that you have, for example? And, you know, going from, and every answer is going to be different, right? Like, and that's what's so beautiful about this process, is that there is no one straight path to achieve these big things. But I'd like to hear from your perspective, what has enabled you to unlock the door into basically playing at this higher level?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that's something I'm particularly, it's particularly close to my story, because my entire career prior to this company has been on the consumer side. I've only ever built consumer products. Now, for the very first time, I'm selling into enterprise. So it's been a whole new ball game for me to learn from, right? And the way to do it is to climb the ladder, right? We started by selling to other startups like ourselves. They were the only ones who would give us a chance when we were just getting started. And then we would get an introduction through to somebody a little bit larger. So one of our first larger clients was this company called Ironclad, which is, you know, a sizable company here in Redwood City in California. And then based on that, we could share this case study of like, oh yeah, we were able to support this organization with thousands of employees. And then we use that to get to the next level and to the next company. And so that's the way we had to do it. It felt like we were earning our way up the ladder. And nowadays we support companies like Netflix and Spotify and Qualtrics and Google. So, you know, it feels like it's been this journey for us. I'm sure for others, there's pre-existing relationships, people selling to their prior companies, all of that. So maybe for a lot of folks, they're able to shortcut that. But for us, it was actually really helpful, because not only did I learn how to sell to larger and larger organizations and understand the needs. A Fortune 500 company is going to have very different needs from a startup, right? But it also allowed us to test and scale our product and engineering practices, right? Being able to support a dozen people at a startup is very different from supporting hundreds, thousands of people at a much larger company. Also, there are things that you don't think about, right? We designed our system to handle up to, 50 pages, 100-page documents. And then one of these clients came in and uploaded 1,000 and broke everything, right? So you learn along the way, and you don't want to be, messing up Walmart or Starbucks on your very first day.
Yeah, and then how much of this is bootstrap versus being funded in Datasaur?
Yeah, so we've been fortunate enough to raise $8 million to date from VCs. So it's definitely enough to grow and scale the team and get all of this up and running. But also it seems small compared to some of the eye-popping numbers we're seeing out there in the AI world today.
Absolutely. You have to be very nimble with that, which leads into the next thing I always love to talk about. This is probably my favorite question of all time is your relationship with leverage. That's one of my favorite words. And especially in this like, I mean, out of all the people to talk to, you're the best that we've got so far, because everything you do is about creating leverage for organizations, using AI to automate things. But when it comes to both like team, people, automations, what is your relationship with that concept of leverage to do more things with less time?
Yeah. So my career has been in the product management role. And that's a very specific role in the tech industry, where we combine engineering, design, and business mentalities to guide the product strategy, right? And so as a startup, I would operate very differently here as opposed to if I were working at, say, Microsoft. You have different strengths and weaknesses of both. So if I were at Microsoft, I'd have a whole lot more resources and marketing, and we can launch a product and immediately get in front of at least 1 million users, right? Whereas at a startup, we don't have access to that kind of privilege. But what we do have is the ability to be nimble and to customize our product to companies' needs. So as we just finished like Q4 road mapping, so we're planning what we're going to do for the remainder of the year internally at the company. And so we stack rank all of the features we want to launch, but I also ask my team to make sure that every single feature, we list out the customers where it would be helpful to them. And we use that as part of the prioritization, right? So we're very mindful of what do customers actually want and need, what has been brought up in sales calls before as nice to haves. We tally all of those up, ensures that there's no bloat in our product. Everything we do is very focused on what deals can we close with this and how can we improve the experience for our existing customers. And that's just a very different mentality and mindset, again, to somebody working at a much larger company.
How do you get your team on board with that process? I assume a lot of teammates have come from other companies where they had very set ways that maybe complemented or were opposite of what you do now. So how do you kind of build that culture to align with building things and building the product the way that your vision is set?
Yeah, there's a saying here in Silicon Valley that what gets measured matters. So what you specifically continue to measure and report on, that's what people pay attention to. So I have the entire company focused on metrics like revenue and weekly active users, like how many people are using these products. So depending on the product, depending on the feature, where in the organization you are, you get measured on these metrics. And I talked to them about where this philosophy came from, right? Like, doesn't it make sense that if we care about revenue and weekly active users, we should be very customer-centric and user-centric? And at the end of the day, I think everybody arrives at that same conclusion. And so, I guess, again, another Silicon Valley term, first principles. You start with these first principles of like what matters to us as a company. I'm completely transparent about our revenue as a company, where we're going, how much runway we have left, and what milestones we need to hit in order to get to the next level. And so when everybody is on board with that and they understand like the company's survival and success depends on meeting these, then yeah, it comes back down to this very basic concept of, okay, let's be very customer centric. Let's make sure that we're succeeding at that level first.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating to also have that transparency, because it's something that it is like a very unique to Silicon Valley. However, the thing that's fascinating about what you just said is that there's that transparency helps tie the purpose in to your team so that they feel that they have more meaning when they show up at work, which is it's kind of like where happiness and meaning are sort of the whole reason why we're here. But I'd love to then just pivot and ask you personally, where do you think happiness comes from?
Let me share something a little more personal. When I was in high school, my dream was to get to retirement. I was so sick of studying. I was like, I just want to get to the point. I want to make enough to be comfortable, and I want to get to the point where I can just travel the world and learn languages all day long. That was my dream, right? And I was like, I'm going to retire as soon as possible. And then I entered the workforce, and I realized there's been, I've worked at a number of different companies throughout my career, and I was happier at some and less happy at others. In fact, at one job, I was particularly miserable because I didn't feel like I had that meaning in what I was spending 8 hours, at the minimum, doing on a daily basis. So I think there has to be some sense of impact, right? For some people, it's doing things that have like I have friends who are working on climate change, and that impact is very inherent. For me, the impact is the impact I have on my employees, my customers, my investors. And so I understand that it's important for me to understand the bigger picture when I'm doing things. I don't want to be working on a feature just because I was assigned that feature or because I was told to do so. So if I extend that and I assume the same for my employees, and to be clear, there is definitely a self-selecting criteria, right? I am always going to be hiring people who share some of this philosophy to begin with. I will assume that my employees are also going to be motivated when they understand what the point of developing this feature is. Every single customer request, complaint, or compliment gets sent to the entire team. Everybody, every engineer, every designer will see when somebody says, oh, this was designed really well, I love using this. But they will also see when the client complains about like, hey, I tried to do this thing and it broke or it didn't work the way I expected. Everybody sees that, right? So they understand the impact that they're having on their end user. So I guess back to the question of like this, some may call it a radical transparency, but what are the downsides to it? For folks that don't share this, is it because you don't trust your employees with that information? Are you worried that if they know we only have 12 months left as a company, like they'll leave? I'd rather tell them up front and get them like, we're all in this boat together kind of mentality rather than just surprise people with layoffs out of nowhere.
So true.
Yeah,
So powerful.
it's funny. We practice very similar approach with our team. We're very transparent about the state of the company, how clients are actually feeling about the work, and it does create a higher level of buy-in than you get from someone who doesn't understand the deeper, workings of the company and where things really stand.
Almost to the point where sometimes we're like, are you sure? Are you sure you're in this with us? Like, it's going to be hard. And they're like, no, we're in. We're all in. This is great. So it's really wild what that
I have
can
that
do.
conversation. Yeah. And I have that conversation even during the hiring interviews, right? Like I will check in with people, especially if they come from larger companies, more benefits, more stability and all of that. I'll be like, this is what you're in for. Are you really sure this is the company for you? So yeah, we need that buy-in from the get-go.
Yeah, that's great. We've covered so many amazing things. I'll let you close it out with one of my favorite things. But you've talked about first principles already. You've talked about some other things, but I love, when you think about like building big dreams, it all comes down from the decisions that we make every day, right? Like all the actions that we take are built on a decision at the beginning. So there's a few decision-making frameworks that have been tossed around in different blog articles, but I'd like to hear from you. Do you have a decision-making framework that you particularly like and want to share, like how it works?
Decision-making framework. I think it comes, so it's not going to be a formalized framework with acronyms and all of that. I really encourage, it comes back to this concept of transparency and everybody understands what position we're in, right? So I really try to push my employees to speak up with their opinions and ideas. And I always try to enforce that the best ideas can come from anywhere within the company, right? We're a 55-person organization. I'm no longer in the weeds and details. So if somebody has like, hey, there's this login mechanism that's going to make it like 10 times easier for people to register and log in, they're more aware of the latest advances in that technology in that space than I could ever be. So one, I try to get people to speak up. Try to get people to push back, right? There's this concept of HIPPO, highest paid person in the room. And for a long time, people would just accept whatever I said, whatever suggestion I had, they would just take it at face value and act on it. But I really try to get people to push back on my ideas and provide their own perspective. But then at the end of the day, once we hear all of these ideas, and if we're still disagreeing, we take one direction and we commit to it. But we can always revisit that concept. Again, that's the nimbleness and agility that we have as a startup. So yeah, that's how we make decisions.
Super awesome. Well, cool. I think we can close it out here. Any last words around Datasaur and
Yeah,
how
what's
people can? Yeah, go ahead,
what's
Luke.
next for Datasaur? Any super deep secrets you can share, or what's coming on that front?
Well, I think what maybe for this audience, what I'll leave you with is Datasaur is the fastest, easiest way to try out a whole lot of different models, right? So we talked about Claude, Gemini, LLaMA 3.2, which just launched. If you're curious and you want to branch out from ChatGPT, come give us a shot, because what we do specifically is allow you to compare. You can put in one prompt, one question, and it'll send it out to the most popular models, and you can compare and see how all of them perform. So if you want to try out O1, if you want to try out different languages in LLaMA 3.2, this is the no hassle way of just getting out there and giving these models a shot.
Excellent.
Awesome. And where should people go to learn more about you or about Datasaur?
Go to datasaur.ai. You can also find me on LinkedIn. My name thing at the end is IY Lee, so feel free to give me an ad. But yeah, also Datasaur is entirely free. I should drop that as well.
Beautiful. Ivan, well, thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise and just this really inspiring story. So I know we're all going to come back and give this a listen a couple times, because a lot of value here. Thank you.
Thank you.